If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call Parents and Addicts in Need at 559-579-1551 or check us out online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media at Pain Nonprofit. Please subscribe to the podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. To donate, please click the link in the description and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
Activity that people can do is really about creating a belief system in self that says I can, I will, and I'm able, through small actionary items, but also narrative therapy, in which this is why we do what we do, CBT, trauma-based therapy. This is how we reframe the experience that we're having, and then this is the work that supports that. Mm-hmm. Over time, you see as change, right? Just like you said, you don't turn on the light switch and have positive self-esteem. Self-esteem is an actionary thing. It's a verb. If you want self-esteem, you have to do something to earn it.
Before we get to part one of our conversation with Tony Hoffman on the Don't Hide the Scars podcast, we want to thank these following sponsors for supporting Parents and Addicts in Need. Ashton Lighting. Whether you're choosing a new lighting style or needing to repair your favorite desk lamp, James Ashton Lighting is the premier destination. The choices are endless for manufactured lighting, custom lighting, outdoor lighting, commercial lighting, and home decor. They will guide you every step of the way, from providing the perfect lighting style to installation. EECU, Educational Employees Credit Union. Unlike many other types of financial institutions, they're a not-for-profit financial institution solely owned by their members. There are no stockholders. Each EECU member is an owner in equal standing and has the right to attend the annual meeting and vote for the board of directors and supervisory committee.
Don't Hide the Scars, a weekly podcast focused on addiction and recovery. Created by the nonprofit PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, and founded by Flindt Andersen.
Tony Hoffman, thank you for joining, founder of Parents and Addicts in Need, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance. Always looking dapper, my brother.
Try to be.
You pull it off.
He is a fashion statement, I gotta tell you.
Yes, and I always have been.
I love it.
I was when I was on my mom's dime. I was really good at it. But when adulthood and parenthood hit, that changed real quick.
Yeah, I go to Facebook just to see what Tony's wearing these days. No, seriously, man. Yeah. I mean, I thought I like shoes, but brother, you like shoes.
I love shoes.
You bet.
And I have a BMXer that went to the Olympics in 2016. We're still friends, and he comments a lot on my Instagram posts. And the outfit I'm wearing right now, he literally commented on my post, "You wore that outfit to Bakersfield?" I can't get away from loud, sometimes maybe obnoxious outfits. I don't know. I just always been into it. So
hey, you wear it well, man.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I seem to become the flannel guy all of a sudden. So everybody, hey, you didn't wear a flannel today? I don't know.
Well, when you wear flannels when it's 105 outside, I mean, I got to question that just a little bit. You know,
the sleeves roll up.
Yeah.
But before we all jumped in the studio here, we are having as we are just three passionate individuals, conversation. As of this recording, you were at a school down in the Oildale area, Bakersfield, and we were talking just about the aftermath of coming out of the lockdown and how it's hitting these kids. Because it's, I mean, how many days, Flindt, do I come in pissed off about the fact of how policy affected these kids?
Oh, just about every day that you come in here. Yeah. No, seriously, it's bad.
And I don't think it's just kids. I think it was adults too.
Oh,
one of the big struggles that administration has had around the country with kids, in my experience, coming back into, basically not having a job, doing some virtual talks, going to a more strenuous schedule than I've ever had, is getting kids to be able to sit still in an auditorium or a classroom anymore, because they've never had to do that in the last 2 years. They were able to kind of have freedom, no structure, really no discipline, that provided them some of these very fundamental life skills that maybe we overlooked or took for granted, so to speak. And I know that when I started traveling the country and people went back to work, you could tell at an entry-level job, those people didn't want to be there.
Right.
They don't want to work the register. They don't want to get you food. They don't want to bag your groceries. You could see on their face that in their mind, this made no sense.
Right.
Because for the last 2 years, they've been able to be given unemployment. sometimes in many cases more money on unemployment than they made at their regular jobs. And there is a psychological consequence to creating such an environment for human beings that are designed to get up, be active, participate in society and community, whether it's for yourself financially or for others in some type of support. And so when you remove all that, I think you get what we're getting now, which is a major social emotional shift in what we see with kids specifically.
No question. I mean, I see kids today, just out in public somewhere, and it bothers me, especially when they're still wearing a mask, when parents have them in that mask. I mean, to me, it's telling them, please be quiet. You're not worthy of being heard or seen, for that matter. And how does that not affect some young person? It has to affect them. And again, we're seeing it in behavior. We're seeing it just in everyday life, that these kids don't know how to be normal kids anymore.
It creates a deep apathy.
Well, and you're if you're, I personally, if you wear a mask, whatever, but if you're outside by yourself and you're wearing a mask, I kind of wonder what the mindset is.
In the car alone.
I wonder, but it's like, that's a constant state of fear. Right. The president's already said the pandemic's over. And if you're still wearing a mask at this point, maybe to protect yourself, but I just wonder what that state of fear actually looks like, the anxiety that comes with that you're scared to remove a mask and then start participating in society in the way that everybody's moved back into. And that fear in itself can't be good.
No, it's not healthy. It's not good in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
But the other thing, though, I mean, just on a little side note, I mean, what I want to ask these people is, by the way, how many times have you changed that mask today? Or has that been the same mask you've been wearing for 6 months? And how many times has it been on the floorboard of your car? How many times has it been in your pocket? I mean, you probably have more germs in that mask than if you didn't wear one.
Yeah.
I think it's the baby blanket.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I see it as a baba, security blanket. It's a way to feel safe for your personal self. And like I say, I support what people want for that. I wonder what that state of fear is actually doing in a psychological way for their ability to participate in society and function without major emotional blowback.
Yeah, I like that. Plus, but with kids now, we're probably not going to see any of that for years.
Well, I think we're seeing it now. I think we're going to see the peak of that mountain as they are 25 to 30 years old, what the workplace looks like, what the expectations for employers look like, what employers are providing for employees in terms of mental health. And I think that we're already trending that way, where companies are becoming more conscious of the mental health crisis that we're in and making sure that they're now providing therapists to all of their employees, or workspaces at Google and Apple have, safe spots in their campuses where people can disconnect when they feel like they need to disconnect. And I think that we're going to see that become even more of a demand, or even see the 4-day work week.
Yeah, but I'm going to take the other side to that. Really, how much does the employer have to provide for somebody? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm an employer, you're an employer, right? All of a sudden now, we have to provide, and I'm playing devil's advocate here. I mean, how much do we have to give these employees? Right now, they've got the best of all worlds.
Yeah.
As well as I, as employers, especially in the state of California, I mean, we as employers, we have no rights. Okay.
Sure.
I mean, and hell, employees can put you out of business if you don't watch it.
Yeah, I mean, and I know you're playing devil's advocate, and I'll do the same. While I do support capitalism, and I truly believe that the United States is the best country in the world, and I've been to many other countries that have helped support my opinion on that, the pandemic has created a larger wealth disparity. You took jobs and stability from lower socioeconomic regions that already lacked money, and then you gave them this pot of free money, and then when you went back to work, there was no work, or you took the little bit of drive that was left And while this whole thing was happening, we watched these other groups become mega, mega rich. They were already mega rich, and now they're mega, mega rich. And so you see the wealth disparity becoming so vast and so large that now the population that does not have is looking at the haves and saying, give me a reason why I should support your vision.
Right.
Yeah.
Because right now I don't want to help you.
Right.
With you being mega rich. And that does, the sad part about that is a Subway owner makes about $35,000 a year. The person making the sandwiches in some cases believes they should be paid $20 an hour to make that sandwich. He makes $35,000 or that person makes $35,000 a year. There's a reason why many Subway owners own several.
Right.
Because until you own 5, you're not making enough money to be able to say, here's more money for what you're doing for me.
Right.
But when a perspective believes that just because you own a business that you are rich and that they no longer want to work for you, we start to create this situation where people are saying, I'm not going to work for you unless this happens. Which I do think some of it is good, right? I'm not a fan of irresponsible capitalism.
Right.
We talked about responsible harm reduction.
Right.
There's also responsible capitalism.
Of course there is.
When my father was young, the business owners took care of the employees.
Right.
There was Christmas bonuses, there was raises. It was about taking care of the people that made your business tick and move and be successful. And nowadays, every business that's $1 billion company is coming up with ways to make more billions.
Yeah.
And it's usually cutting things from the employees. It's usually cutting things from the consumer. Use Apple as a prime example. They stopped putting chargers in the box. Why? Because if you don't have a charger in the box, you have to pay $40 for the charger in the Apple store. Right? This is irresponsible capitalism.
Right.
Because who's the winner?
Apple.
The top.
All day long.
The employees selling you it, they're not getting anything.
Right.
And so I see both sides where there is a responsibility on the person to create their own story and move into a position and say, this isn't what I want from life. I want more from my life. But there's also this mechanism in which the rich seem to be getting richer and the poor seem to be getting poorer. And Matt and I think we're witnessing that firsthand today in Oildale.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's getting more poor there to the point that I listened to a kid. This is something I've never heard. A kid say today, you can't help anybody in this town. There's no hope when a kid says, you can't help anybody here, bro. Like everybody's going to use drugs or sell drugs in this town.
I have, and when you told me that, I have never heard that statement at a school that I have ever spoken at. I'm sure you haven't either.
No, that's the first time.
I mean, that statement in itself is frightening to me.
And that to me is clarity on the wealth disparity and how communities that are lower socioeconomic are becoming so torn apart that the individuals that are there can't even see hope at school anymore.
Yep.
Or there's more schools that are going to be seeing similar situations like this where the kids don't see a reason to even go to school because they don't want to work for Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
They don't want to work for Jeff Bezos. Right? They don't want to help these people who don't seem to be sharing their wealth.
But don't you think that some of these kids don't even want to work at all?
Sure.
Because that's how they're being raised?
Sure, I think that there's a mechanism of, the Americanism where you can be a homeless person and have an iPhone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. But we can go to Argentina right now and people are still riding donkeys through the street.
Yeah.
But our homeless population, who is pampered heavily in California, can have an iPhone, a smartphone to connect to the internet, to contact whoever they want at any time. And so these kids, they're growing up feeling like they're oppressed.
Right.
But in reality, when you compare them to the situations in Brazil that I saw when I was there for the Olympics, living in the favelas, they're concrete boxes. I was told they might eat 2 to 3 times a week if they were lucky.
Right.
It's like that kind of situation breeds a totally different perspective on what it is to wake up and breathe versus being here in America where even the people that don't have way more than other countries.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised, top-quality care with programs for detox, inpatient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living, support groups, and more. With 50-plus years of combined experience and sobriety, Flindt, Andersen, and Thelma Gatlin Wilson provide adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, and a safe, comfortable environment. To begin the process of recovery, to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction, call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
Gosh, that's amazing. Out of all that you've gone to hundreds, thousands of schools at this point?
Probably a little over 1,000 for sure.
Yeah, and to hear such a...
But that's what
what's my words without me getting too political? Because it's the screwed up, effed up thing, like 3 addicts sitting here, We all got their different ways. So you take away from people, and I've seen it so many times, we all need purpose, and I've talked about this. Tony, one of the people when I fell off my last relapse, 2 people answered the phone, you and my now sponsor, which I'm still so grateful for. But they're lacking any sort of purpose, any sort of motivation, any desire to be anything, and that is the easiest way to want to just go and numb out what you are feeling because you think so low of yourself. And I'm not talking I don't want to get off on the self-esteem movement because that was all a bunch of bullshit like we can be handed self-esteem. No, we earn it and we start to see it in ourselves. And for me, that is the most heartbreaking part of what you were saying. They just don't see anything in themselves whatsoever, don't know how unique, how amazing,
right,
and what beautiful things they have to offer. And it angers the you-know-what out of me.
Yeah,
sure, and it's not just, we're not just seeing that in lower socioeconomic regions.
Right, no.
I've seen it everywhere.
What we're seeing is across the board, communities now struggling with youth in a way that we've never seen before. Right. And it's why I'm busier than I've ever been, is the mental health crisis is really what's driving the drug crisis that we're seeing become more prevalent with fentanyl, full steam on the West Coast, and then the lacing of fentanyl and all of these other substances taking young kids' lives in a way that I've never seen before. In 13 years as a speaker, I never had a school contact me and say they had an active student die from a drug overdose.
Right.
Flindt and I heard about the individuals that died from Clovis Unified 2 years after they graduated, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years after they graduated, right? And then at that point, it was no longer the school district's problem. So they didn't even have to address those issues. I was just in Oregon and 2 students overdosed, seniors, on fentanyl. I was in Maryland 2 weeks prior to that. A 13-year-old student was Narcaned overdosing on fentanyl in the bathroom at school. A senior in the most affluent community in Maryland, Montgomery County, senior died. Fentanyl overdose. Active students. I've had 15 schools this year contact me and say they've had students, active students, dying from fentanyl overdoses. And really the way I see it is it's a mental health crisis. Kids are not feeling hope. There's trauma at home. They're unsure of how to manage the experience that they're having. And the access to substances today seems so much more prevalent. And these phones have enabled, when I was out there, you were privileged to get a drug dealer's number.
Right.
That was it. You were privileged. You know, I told people
we knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody, but never the main number.
Nowadays on Snapchat, they promote it.
Right.
Yeah.
They'll hit you up. Right. I got this. You need this? Let me know. Nobody ever came up to me and said, hey, do you need this? Do you need that? It was a secret society off the corner of the grid. And if you wandered that way, you found out where the locations were on the grid for these people. And now with social media and the kids, it's almost like it's become so acceptable that kids are becoming more flamboyant in the way that it's put out there, which is scary in itself because they're kids.
Well, and speaking of that, just being kids, when you're talking about the mental health side of this, I think there's a lot of parents out there that think that their kids are full-blown adults. And everybody has to keep in mind, these kids' brains are still just that, kids' brains. That brain doesn't become fully mature till the age of 26, and that's without drugs and alcohol. So how are parents expecting 17, 16, 17, 18, even 19, 20-year-olds to make responsible decisions, but they're allowing them to make these decisions when they're not even, in my opinion, ready to make it yet?
Yeah.
You know, and so what, we're all so surprised, right, when kids make lousy decisions. I mean, it's no surprise. But then I think that kid, because of that decision that they make, if this makes any sense, they probably realize that was a poor decision. Then they turn to the substance because of that decision. I mean, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I'm trying to get that correlation, you know, between maturity and being that kid and the poor decisions that they're making.
Sure.
It starts to spiral.
So my belief is you have a young kid, let's just say 6 to 10 years old, really critical years, in my opinion, in their life. Some kids are given care, nurture, empowerment, love, compassion. And these individuals, just like anybody else, are going to, as they grow up in their younger years, experience rejection, experience meanness, anxiety, sadness, maybe grief at some point where they lose something that they love. The involvement of the parents will allow, if they teach this young individual what they're experiencing, through the words a young person can communicate, I feel sad, I feel rejected, I feel anxious. The parent can use that as a guide to say, okay, this is what we do when we feel anxious. These are the steps we take. Really what's happening is this individual is growing up to learn that when they feel anxious, I'm still okay.
Right.
When I feel rejection, I still am enough. When I feel sad, soon I'll feel better, right? And each one of these things that comes with these negative or uncomfortable emotions is some type of actionary item that takes them further away from the discomfort emotionally. When an individual like myself grows up in an environment where mom and dad are workaholics and emotionally neglecting me, not by their own doing, because my parents loved me and had every great intention to provide for me what I needed, I felt anxiety but didn't feel okay.
Right.
I felt sadness and felt like it was never going to go away. I felt rejection and believed I'll never be enough because there was no supporting cast to help create that story, the dialogue within myself, right? So now I have all of these emotions that are like a calculus problem for me because I suck at math and I always will, right? I don't know the answer to what this means because I can't even tell you that I have anxiety. You know, it's like the individual that's sexually abused as a child. By the time they're 12 years old, they'll tell you, I don't think about it.
Right.
Yet they're using LSD, marijuana, drinking alcohol, is trying to run away from their house. Everything about their behavior says the trauma that this individual was inflicted with has a direct correlation with their behavior. They may not be thinking about it because they're not telling us about it. Is I'm going through these emotional peaks and valleys, and I'm trying to find answers and I'm trying to find relief. And then you find a substance or a relationship or cutting yourself, or these types of behaviors that can offer you some type of instant change in your physical feeling or your emotional feeling, and then that becomes your survival skill.
Right.
Is we're seeing kids more today struggling with feeling okay with anxiety. Kids not wanting to take masks off because they're living in anxiety and fear that this virus is going to cause them or their families harm. And while they're feeling unsafe, they're also looking for a way to feel safe.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is really what I've been doing with my speaking over the last 3 years now, is connecting the dots between, you know what, this isn't a good person, bad person thing.
Right.
And we're seeing this snowball effect or this avalanche effect with young people because it really comes down to mental health. Dr. Drew, years ago, I think 7 years ago, said that some people just emotionally don't have a struggle. They just struggle with addiction. And I strongly disagree with that statement, and I almost wonder if he still believes that, because even the person like yourself that may be middle-aged that has a surgery and finds OxyContin for the first time, there is some type of euphoric feeling that fixes or manages an emotional response that maybe you didn't even know you had. And the draw to the drug is actually not the feeling, it's what it does to the feeling that you have before you take the substance.
You have said so much right there. Thank you. Because going back to my own story, I mean, man, all of a sudden my mind is going way back, because I was born in the middle 50s, right? And with that ailment that you just didn't talk about.
Right.
And had all those surgeries, right? And again, parents, not that they didn't love me, but no, they didn't talk to me about it.
Mm-hmm.
Doctors didn't talk to me about it. It was simply, we're going to bring you in, we're going to cut you open, we're going to try to fix you. And oh, by the way, we need to do this 23 different times, right? So as a young person, I didn't know how to cope with that or deal with that. So when to remember my first opioid, which again, I can't remember if 6, 7, 8, whatever it was, right? Mm-hmm. That was heaven.
Yeah.
Because that was taking away all that anxiety. As when you mentioned that, man, that's what I really went through all those years, was that anxiety.
And here's what I say now. We all know the person that says, I never started using drugs because I tried it one time and I didn't like feeling like I was not in control. It made me feel out of control. Well, let me spin the table. I don't feel in control unless I'm on something.
Right. That made me
feel in control.
me feel
in control. I wanted what you had.
Right.
You didn't want what I had, but I was thinking what you had was achievable through changing the way that I felt.
Right.
You, for some reason, had a security within yourself before any substances came into play. So when you introduced a foreign object, it made you feel unsafe.
You bet.
Who wants that?
Nobody. Right.
No human being wants to feel unsafe.
Absolutely.
The catch is, there's plenty of parents that are heavily involved in their kids' lives, and yet they still find themselves struggling with addiction.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, parents are overly involved.
Right.
Their expectations of their children are 4.0s or valedictorians or Ivy League schools, or you got to play sports and have a 4.0. And the only thing this young person's trying to do is measure up to the expectations of the household, when in reality, they don't feel like the expectations they're supposed to be meeting. Right. And so they themselves find them slipping into this place where safety and feeling like everything is okay despite the expectations, uncomfortableness that brings, also is with a substance.
Right. Yeah. It's and I know I've said this before on different shows, but Operation Varsity Blues, the whole Lori Loughlin ordeal. Remember when she was paying people to get her kid into universities?
Oh, yes.
Like USC
right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
USC. And it's called Operation Varsity Blues. You ought to watch it if you haven't seen it.
I think I've seen it. It's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild. But I go back to these two kids. They were 17. They're seniors in high school. They're on their computers. They're live. They're waiting to see if they get accepted to the college of their choice, and both of them don't. They have a meltdown. On television. I mean, a meltdown. But now it even makes more sense, because that's total anxiety, I think.
Sure.
Total anxiety, because I can just picture these kids now, as I was watching them going, oh my God, what is mom and dad going to think? Right. I didn't get in. I mean, I can see, and they're crying on air.
Right.
And then of course my follow-up is, well, they're going to be walking through my door at some point.
Yeah.
Because it's the value that they've placed upon this thing, that the story that they've told themselves and future tripping about it, that now they've stripped away all their worth just because of this thing didn't occur.
And they didn't have a plan B. Parents didn't say, hey, it's okay if you not get in, but maybe let's try Fresno State, or let's try Wyoming, or hell, what's wrong with going to a city college and for 2 years and getting your GED out of the way and moving forward. There was no plan B, no backup whatsoever.
And this is also why I say, I may not be able to identify growing up in a gang-ridden neighborhood where drugs, violence, prostitution, and colors were the order of the day. But I can tell you that the expectations and what it was like to grow up in an upper middle class family, and that we may have experienced very similar emotions from different experiences that are really the root of how I ended up in prison, coming from a upper middle class family, right? There were things missing in my family, just like there's things missing in everybody's family. Nobody's coming from the perfect family.
Right.
You know, I gave my talk, when I did my TED Talk at the end, I talked about the girl I dated that's father sent the email and said, you know, why would you have this guy around your children? This is a man that went to prison. They can't be rehabilitated. I raised you better than this. This is a professor who sends this email. His daughter had an eating disorder. His daughter also watched him beat mom up every week.
Right.
But when they left the house, they were in the nicest cars.
Yeah, you bet.
They left the nicest house in Clovis,
Right.
where it was really big and everything looked pretty.
Everything.
And we grew up in a time where vulnerability wasn't a thing. So we didn't talk about how everybody's home was quote unquote broken to some degree, right? There's always this toxic behavior that somebody has to learn how to manage while they're going through it. And it's like, because we lived in such a time where we hid everything, nobody really knew what to do with what was happening.
Right.
Because life seemed to come at us at this point when we were in our mid-20s, when we were 18 years old. But we didn't know that everybody else's life was also in a very similar situation as ours.
Right.
So we often compartmentalized that experience to ourselves, isolated, allowed this emotional pressure to build to the point that substance, people, places, and things became our outlet to relieve ourselves of what we didn't want.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It's ironic you bring that up. I had a conversation not that long ago with a childhood friend of mine, and her and I were talking, and I went, gonna quote here, I didn't realize all of us were fucked up, and we had a big chuckle about it because we started breaking it down, and it was, oh my gosh, this person that was our friend, she went through sexual abuse. No wonder she was dating guys that were 20 years old when we were 14, 13, 14. Oh, you know, so-and-so, their dad committed suicide. No wonder they were smoking pot when we were in 6th, 7th grade. You know, these things, you can just start to see that reality of what you're talking about, that everyone is having some battle that's going on. I know we post these memes and things and people don't take it serious, but it's true.
Yep.
Everyone.
And by the way, sometimes it's not these super traumatic events of sexual abuse or physical abuse, right? Sometimes mom is diagnosed with cancer at 10 years old, and she leaves the family in a very unfair way because the other kids that you go to school with, they still get to have mom. Right? It's how do we conversate with ourselves about that experience? What does that tell us about life? How do we compartmentalize that experience? If we're not careful, we actually put ourselves in a position where we take our power away from us through the conversation we create about that experience. Or you go to war. You know, that's a big thing that I've been exposed to more, is what the veteran experiences when they come home, is the nightmares, the anxiety, the no purpose, you know, losing everything that they had over there and coming back to society with really no help to manage what they saw over there, and they find themselves in the same situation that I was in from a totally different reason.
Right. You know, it's interesting you say that, because I'm not comparing war to what I'm about to say. But as you know, I worked in a paramedic unit, you know, for American Ambulance, and I worked in the emergency room at Community years ago, and you know, and to see the things that I saw during those paramedic days, I mean, I might as well have been in a war. You know, it just wasn't constant. It just, but still, the gunshots, the stabbings, the car accidents. You know, we'd see one where somebody was totally mangled and walked away. Then you'd see another one where somebody, there wasn't an ounce of blood anywhere and dead. You know, or vice versa. You'd see it all, right? And I remember going to my parents' house one night and just kind of breaking down and talking to my dad, saying, "God, it seems like we're just pieces of machinery here." You know, I was all ass backwards at that point. And of course, I'm using everything under the sun at that point too. But you know, but that trauma piece, again, It doesn't have to be violent. It could be something like you said, not as easy, but as something as losing your mother or losing your dad or losing a sibling,
Which, by the way, I would go back and live my past over the situation you had.
Yeah.
I will selfishly say that my mom and dad and I are not super close, but I would take what I went through over losing them when I was younger any day of the week.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
For me personally.
Right.
And I'm not close with my family. So when I hear a situation like that, I have a ton of sympathy because it's not something I would wish upon anybody or even want to imagine for myself. I mean, and now that I'm getting older, right, I've moved to Texas, I can tear up thinking about saying bye to my mother and father because they're in their mid-60s. Yeah. We're approaching their final chapters. Right. And saying bye to them, my parents have meant so much to me. And I know as a young person, those are your heroes.
You bet. Yeah.
Those are your only source of hope, taking care of you, to lose that in a snap of a finger.
Yeah. I mean, I lost both mine. And even when I did, it was tough. Because again, we didn't have the best relationship, but they're my parents.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they will always be my parents. There was never a parenting manual, by the way, for everybody out there. Okay, nobody has that written in stone.
Oh, I was going to ask you for that next.
Well,
I struggle with two teenagers. Can you pass a manual?
Hey,
down?
Come on! I got two kids. I was the perfect dad. Yeah. But yeah, to lose somebody like that, we have to be able to know how to grieve for ourselves. Mm-hmm. I also believe that's a big thing. Yeah. I think there's not enough emphasis put on that, grieving in the proper way. Even somebody that has lost a child to addiction, one of the first things I tell parents this has happened to is I said, take the first 2 years and do nothing but grieve. Find that group that you need to be associated with, and go through the grieving process. I think there's too many parents that I could get in trouble for this. There's too many parents that dive right into wanting to be able to help somebody else or save somebody else, but they're also forgetting about the other kids they've got over here on the side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's no different than what you had told me and reminded me of. And we probably talked about too, was not letting the work that I'm doing be my recovery.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not your recovery.
I think it's the same thing. And yes, please do help people. But man, if you're not in a good place, which
you're not going to help anybody.
Yeah. Journaling back, looking at where I was at in life, what I was doing, I was preaching more than I was practicing.
Well, and I think that's why, I know Tony's the same way, but I took 7 years after I got clean to start this. This was not something I wanted on my resume, to be honest with you. I had no intention of doing this. In fact, it was the farthest thing from my mind. And then all of a sudden, that's how God works, and all of a sudden, okay, well, here it is, right? But yeah, you have to take that time.
Yeah, I had the ambitions to do, what I'm doing, but I focused on the racing part first.
Yeah.
Right? The racing part was the selfish, keeping myself upright, giving me a goal, giving me a reason to get out of bed, training, staying physically active, connecting with other individuals that were also, putting their life into the work of becoming a professional athlete. And over time, the opportunities to start giving back to others became more prevalent. They grew in the amount of times that I was able to do that. And I think one thing that's helped me is that as opportunity grew, I took those opportunities. Yeah. I did, and at the expense of letting some things go that I wanted. You bet. Letting go of racing was not easy for me. Letting go of my nonprofit after it was time to let go of the Freewheel Project. I stayed in Fresno probably 4 years too long because I didn't want to let go of something that I had worked hard to build and help other people with. So it's like opportunities have come, but oftentimes at the expense of me having to say, this is no longer for me.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have that as a grieving process too.
You bet you do.
I see it with athletes that I worked with. They retire and they don't know who the hell they are.
Right.
They're grieving the loss of the sport. Yeah. And oftentimes we see those individuals, right? They go bankrupt, struggling with alcoholism, a drug addiction because what? They're trying to manage the experience that comes with the end of a career.
Right. And I'll tell you what, I mean, I'm 67. I mean, how much longer? I mean, everybody keeps saying you're not going anywhere, and I'm not planning on going anywhere yet. But you know, this is our identity. This is what we do. This is who we are. But I have to know at some point it's going to come to an end.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah.
And I'm already sort of halfway preparing myself for that, you know, because I don't want to be one of those people that hang on too long, right? And I'm not being useful anymore. Because this is not, how do I put this? I mean, my family comes first more than anything, and I would never put anything in their way. But at some point, things are going to end, and I hope that, you know, I'm ready for it when it happens.
Well, and I think that it connects greatly with addiction, because how much did we self-identify by being an addict? You
Yes.
know? I mean, I was.
Well, everybody
Jason,
knew me as one, that's for damn sure.
I was Jason, the fun alcoholic. I had to
Yeah.
let go of that. I had to let go that the calls aren't going to come in anymore.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Even though it was self-destructive and I hated it when I was sober, there wasn't going to be those texts from girls anymore. Are you coming out? Or none of that shit. I had to let it all go away.
Yeah.
And take a different course of action.
One of the biggest things that's helped me is taking away what I do as my identification of self and turning self into an emotional being. Remove my fleshly physical layer, and I'm left with my spirit and my emotional person. And by identifying myself as somebody that's passionate, empathetic, compassionate, hardworking in terms of persistent, I can then take those emotions and I can say, where are these emotions effective?
Right.
Right? Compassion and empathy makes me great as a communicator and somebody that works with people struggling with addiction.
Right.
Because I have the ability to feel somebody else's story and understand their situation, and they can see that I see them and hear them.
Right.
And then now we have a connection that somebody that does not have compassion and empathy to be able to make a difference in their life, right? My persistence allows me to push through situations as an entrepreneur. Right? I can push through the adversity that comes with starting businesses or building a speaking career. And I think that's been a big thing for me, is making sure that I focus on my emotional self.
Yeah.
Everything else is just what I get to do.
Right.
Yeah.
You know? And if I only get to do it, then that has an expiration date.
It does.
Just like me racing.
Right.
It had an expiration date. And sometimes we want to keep the meat in the fridge long past its expiration date, or the milk long past its expiration date, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing?
Right.
We're taking up space that something else could be in there doing.
You bet.
That's effective.
You bet. Couldn't agree more.
How do you, working with people now in treatment, PH wellness, with that reframing, how do you take someone with that? Because both of you gentlemen work with people of varying degrees, substances, you know, and it seems to be across the board. Most of the treatment centers, the people we've talked to from Massachusetts to here, alcohol seems to be the big one, the vast majority. But how do you really work with that reframing with people with that to help them understand that?
And this is where Flindt has, I'm more jealous of Flint's role in this with New Perceptions, is Flindt gets to be there probably way more than I've ever been at PH Wellness, because I'm on the road Monday through Friday right now. I'm more of the face of the organization that's kind of created the vision behind what our clinical process looks like, have been sat down with all of our clinical staff and had a hand in the hiring process. But a lot of CBT, DBT types of therapy. We have groups that are focused on belief systems, and then implementing things like fitness as an ancillary activity that people can do is really about creating a belief system in self that says I can, I will, and I'm able, through small actionary items, but also narrative therapy, in which this is why we do what we do, CBT, trauma-based therapy. This is how we reframe the experience that we're having, and then this is the work that supports that. Over time, you see as change, right? Just like you said, you don't turn on the light switch and have positive self-esteem. Self-esteem is an actionary thing. It's a verb. If you want self-esteem, you have to do something to earn it.
Right.
Right? Just like anything else.
Yep.
If you want to make a good living, you have to go out and earn it. Nobody's going to give it to you. And so one of the things that we're doing at PH Wellness is trying to bring in the ancillary activity like fitness, because each one of us as business owners has used fitness as a big part of our recovery. And I think that that's what's great about us, is that we're just using what helped us.
Absolutely.
And I'm certain that new perceptions, it really could be Flint's perceptions. Right? Because as owners, we create what we needed.
Exactly what we needed.
Exactly what we needed. When I go in and speak, I don't speak on a stage and talk down to people.
Right.
I'm talking to myself.
Right.
I'm going up there and speaking to Tony the way he needed to be spoken to.
Bet.
And that's
well said, by the way.
What's missing.
Yeah.
And that's what we did is we're trying to use things like that. And then the career center that once we get that really kind of full steam ahead is offer that extra opportunity that says, hey, not only do we believe in you, we've gotten you a get well job, you've come here to merge, we've stabilized you, now you're ready for a career that you can support yourself with. Because you can, you will, and you're able.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, one of a friend of mine, former guest Greg Champion, with what he does, they do a lot of that. He'll get that mentorship going. You know, he'll have someone come there in Malibu. I forget where it is. Nice, really nice area. Been up there a couple times. Their houses are great. Like one of the Clippers is right next door to their treatment place. But
that's talking your lingo now, buddy. Basketball.
Geez, yeah.
There
get me started. Go get me started.
That's a whole other podcast.
We can start a Patreon channel, and Tony and I can go on basketball for about 5 hours.
6 hours for sure.
Yeah, at least, huh? But he talked a lot about that, the mentorship. So it's someone would come in, oh, you want to be a screenwriter? I know someone who's a screenwriter. He's in recovery too. We're going to pair you up with them and get it going.
Yes.
So is that kind of a lot of the approach you're taking? Because I know all the gentlemen you started with are all in recovery.
Yeah, but no, we haven't taken that approach. And I've actually met other centers that do that. And obviously I've heard about the one that you're talking about. And I think that's a great approach. I know that our clinical director, Dr. Blair Steele, she actually worked for a center that did something very similar, and they had a young man that came through that said, I want to be a DJ. And everybody laughed at the kid. And sure shit, this kid's a famous DJ now.
Is he really?
Yes, they connected him with some people that could introduce him into the DJ realm. The dude travels all over Europe, has got hundreds of thousands of followers, and it's like, really what he needed was access to what he wanted to do. Yeah. And through that, he was able to find himself in a place where drugs and alcohol were no longer the way to feel okay. Right? But that's, I see that as no different than somebody that finds Suboxone as the route to recovery to get themselves to a position where they're no longer self-destructing through drugs. It's a very rare case.
Yeah, it is.
We could line up a whole group of people and say, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? Well, I want to sell cars. Well, I'll take you over to Michael Chevrolet and introduce you to the owner, and we'll have you selling cars. Well, 1 week later, they're back out doing what they were doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Just because the opportunity is there doesn't mean that the success rate somehow goes through the roof.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But it does, I think, attest to the idea of sometimes we just need one person to believe in us. You know? And I know when I've watched Flindt speak, haven't yet seen you speak in person, but I know that oftentimes you gentlemen are that one person for so many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I read you something?
Absolutely.
Yep. This is powerful to me. So I got a message Thursday last week, 4:10. Let me pull it up here. It says, Tony, man, I don't know if you remember me, but I used to go to Hamilton Elementary as a kid. And I remember when you came to speak to my school, my PE teachers sent you to come to speak to me after you were done speaking. But I remember you telling me to do good and improve my behavior. I should have listened to you, man. I began to gangbang and I got into some serious stuff. But I'm 20 years old now, been locked up since I was 16 years old. But I just wanted to contact you and tell you I've been improving myself. Currently in college trying to better my life. But for some reason your words followed me my whole life. Well, I hope you get this message. I left my dad's number just in case. And, it might suck that this kid's probably serving a life sentence. But that moment that we shared was what is going to carry him clearly.
You bet.
Through his prison sentence. There was something that he felt in that moment that he said, I think I need to do what this guy said now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When there is no hope in prison for many people, there's only the encouragement to continue shooting dope and drinking alcohol. And Flint's been doing this thing longer than I have. Is sometimes we don't even this was 10 years ago. Right. You know, I remember this conversation, but not until I got this message.
Right.
You know, it's the people that message me 5 years later, 7 years later, and they tell you what exactly happened in that moment that you were there, that you realize you knew it was bigger than you, right. But you didn't realize that there were people that grabbed onto what you said and held onto it as a truth that propelled them at some point in their life, whether it was then or 10 years later.
Tony, people want to get a hold of you, find out more about everything you're doing. Run it down for them, good sir.
You can find me on Instagram, probably the easiest way, Tony M. Hoffman. That's where I update most of my stuff. I have a Twitter, but I don't have a cat profile, so I don't really mess around on Twitter and argue about politics. Facebook, Tony Hoffman Speaking. I have a podcast with about 100 episodes. Don't update it much now because of my schedule, but that's one choice on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcast app. You can check out my stuff about my treatment center, phwellness.com.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call Parents and Addicts in Need at 559-579-1551 or check us out online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media at Pain Nonprofit. Please subscribe to the podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. To donate, please click the link in the description and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
This podcast contains the views and opinions of hosts and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is sharing their unique perspective, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. Privacy is of the utmost importance to us. For those wishing anonymity, people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality at the request of certain guests. This website or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship. If you find any errors in any of the content of this podcast or blogs, please send a message through the contact page.